Alright boys and girls, so this will be an installation video of a fairly cheap tachometer. Got this one on Amazon. You can find them cheaper, you can find them more expensive. This is about a $50 range tachometer. It's 5" in diameter, and the reason I chose this one is because it came with the shift light, and that it's also slightly a name brand. If you've ever gone to the auto parts store, you'll see this brand or a few other brands, but this one's one you'll find at a major auto parts store chain. What sold me on this one was the shift light. It is Bosch, which is technically, if you guys remember, Sunpro. For some of the older guys, it's a Sunpro tack, and those have been around forever, and they're fairly accurate. These tachometers usually have a bracket already included. They usually have a little bit of a recess there from Sunpro, and that's to be able to mount it to a steering column. This one's 5" in diameter, has adjustable shift light. Did not come with the hose clamp, which is what I'm going to be using to attach it to my steering column. But it did come with the Allen key to be able to adjust the bracket. The bracket is indexable, and so is the shift light. The shift light can be moved any place on here, and so can the bracket. The bracket can be moved completely around. In that regard, it's kind of like a Autometer tachometer. So these things are pretty simple to set up as far as the selection of cylinders. On this one, you remove the back cover, and there's a little switch in here. And I don't think it's going to show up so well, but there's numbers off to the side: 2, 4, 6, 8. And that's the cylinders. So if you had a 2-cylinder, you put it all the way to the top. If you have a 4-cylinder, you put it the next one down, 6-cylinder, next one down, V8 all the way to the bottom. So for our selection here, this is a 4-cylinder car, so that's 2, and we're going to put it on 4. Very simple, and you can feel and hear the detents, and that's it. Light bulb is right there. If you ever had to replace it, it just twists out. There's your light bulb. Simple as can be. Okay, so we're going to put the back cover back on. Now, as far as wiring, most of these only have 4 wires. Black is ground 90% of the time. White is going to be for your lights. And green is the signal wire going to your coil. And red is power. Now, that may vary between a brand or so, but it's commonly the colors that you're going to be using. And if you have any doubt when you buy a tachometer, or anything for that matter, you can always refer to the instructions that come in said box. This one came with like 4 different languages, and it came with some splicers, a couple of screws to mount it with, and a rubber mounting pad so that you don't scratch up your dash, which is kind of funny because you're going to be putting holes through it. I may use that to insulate against my steering column, though, I'm not sure. But so sometimes they do come a little bit, more money for this one than some of the other ones that were like $30, but it came with some actual stuff to install it. Like I say, it also came with the wrench for loosening up the clamp to be able to move this around. What I'm going to do next is, I've already set this up in the car. The location of the tachometer is really nice, but the shift light is up under my dash, so I'm going to move the shift light around to this 4,000 area mark. Another thing about this tack that one thing I don't really care for is the RPM range. I mean, there's no typical street car that's going to hit 10,000 RPM. Even rotaries are going to be probably here in the 8,000 range. So that's just a little ridiculous, An 8,000 RPM tack would have been better, but they don't sell it in this size for this brand with that RPM range. So my car only goes to about 5, so that's one thing I always think is a little ridiculous, but that's what you get for this price range. So we're going to get onto that. I'm going to move the shift light over here. As you can see, it has plenty of cable to be able to move it 360 degrees around it. So we'll get on that next. Okay, so for this, just need to take our supplied Allen wrench, and we're going to loosen the clamp right here. Just tighten it right there. And you just need to loosen it enough to be able to move whichever component you're trying to move. So, as we can see here, this whole thing can be moved back, and this little guy just slides in there and has a little horseshoe shape to it. And I want to put the shift light over in this range here. So we'll put that on there, like so. I'm going to move, that's nice, move the whole clamping ring forward. This will pinch it in there a little bit better. And then reinstall, retightened, the bolt on this side, which pinches it all together. And we'll just tighten up one more little snug here. There we go. Now we can mount this in the car, and we can see where we want it. Like I say, I'm using a hose clamp to mount this. You could use screws, which means you'd have to take the bracket off to mount it. But I want to use a hose clamp because I am going to install it on the steering column, as I think that's the easiest place for me to mount it without cutting up my car. Okay, so we mounted it onto the steering column. I've made sure that I have clearance between my legs, because this is a stick shift car, so we have brake, gas, clutch, and all that to deal with. As you can see through my steering wheel, I can see my RPM range, and I can see my shift light. So that is something to consider when you're mounting it. You don't want to put it somewhere where it looks good, and then when you sit in the driver's seat, you can't see anything. And as you can see over here, it is just a hose clamp going around the steering column, which hooks it on there, and it's on there pretty good. So, you know. Now, don't mind this bunch of mess of wiring. I'll clean that up in a moment so we can see this better. So, I have a hole already drilled in the dash over here for these other gauges, and I will be able to run my wiring over through here. And first off, what I'm going to do is measure out a piece of length of tubing to put this in so it looks a little bit better and will hide some of the funky colors. So I'll go get some of that cut and slid over these wires, and then we'll come back and show you how to wire this up. For this installation, you could do several ways of wiring this up. You could use wire nuts, you could use connectors, or you could use solder, which is the way I'm going to do this. And the first thing I'm going to start off with, my signal wire. I have a wire ran to the back of the car to the coil, because this car is rear-engined, and we are going to solder on these two wires here. See if they'll cooperate. Now I've already put my heat shrink tubing on here. Alright. Just use the soldering iron to heat this up and shrink it. There we go. Now, with this installation, I have some other wires that I'm going to include in here, because this is my power, this is my red and my ground here, and I'm going to end up hooking up another gauge in this gauge pod, so I'm going to incorporate its wiring while I'm at it. So we have our tachometer mounted. It is secure in here. Shift light is in this position where I can see it. I have my wiring ran over through here, and there's a little bit of a groove in my dash right here that this wire tucks up on nicely. Comes over here. I've also wired it into this other gauge that I have going here, because this requires a key switch power, a ground, and a light switch. So The white wire goes to my light switch. I have a yellow wire right here which transitions naturally up to the switch. This other wire goes to the other gauge. I have my green wire going to this black wire, which is my signal for my tachometer. And my red wire is hooked up to key switch power. Black wire is hooked up to a ground, and white, as we just discussed, is hooked up to the light switch. So I'm going to show you next where you hook this onto the ignition system for a points and condenser car. If you have an MSD distributor or MSD style box or a HIA distributor, you'll have to look in the instructions for those. This is a points and condenser car, so this is simple. MSD boxes usually have a separate wire coming out of the box for it. You'll have to look in their instructions to see what color and where that goes. Okay, so for the tachometer, you just hook the wire, your sensing wire, to the negative side of the coil. This is my power side, this is my negative side. My little green wire in the very, very back here is to my condenser. This wire is to the tachometer. And this is the power from the car, and this is power to a relay that I have running off my coil for to be able to engage a relay when I turn on the key. And that's it, boys and girls. That's how you install a pretty cheap tack, and hopefully this has helped you. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and get out there and let's get our cars going. Alright, boys and girls, so there it is. Tack is in. We'll take it for a little ride.